right, welcome back to the Location Independence podcast. Today I am back with Robert. Hi, Robert. Nice to see you again.
Hello, Michelle.
So today we're going to talk about, actually, this is something that came up this morning having coffee with a friend, and it was really timely for a lot of the conversations that we have, and that is globalization. And globalization is something that impacts us whether or not we really realize it. And the conversation that we had today was actually about globalization and how economies some economies, especially more privileged economies, have leveraged less privileged economies in order to essentially get cheap labor. And what was amazing for a good decade has now essentially changed the landscape in a lot of countries. So we're seeing the rise of the economy in places where traditionally, I can speak for the U.S., where traditionally the U.S. is outsourced. So the Philippines, the India, Robert, I guess those are the two primary ones that we're speaking about. But I went to Thailand recently, and the prices went they more than doubled. And so whereas before you could go to Thailand and get a nice meal for $5-6, now a nice meal is going to cost you $25, which is essentially what you would pay in New York, in Chicago, in LA. It's actually more expensive than what I would pay in Berlin, or in a lot of other cities that I've lived. So we're really seeing this, what I would assume most economists probably predicted, and that is a kind of balancing of finances. And it's really interesting and fascinating to watch. I've seen it happen in the real estate sector. I see it happening in the cost of goods. I still haven't seen it as much in the cost of labor, which starts to cause real problems in those economies where, food, housing, etc. costs, essentially the top price that you would pay in the most expensive markets in the US and Europe, like New York, Paris, London, these prices you're seeing in these economies, and the cost of labor is very low, which means the people who are earning that labor cost, they can't even afford to buy a meal in their own home. And it's not happening so cut and dry, because it's definitely still cheaper places and more expensive places. But this is just, the start of what we're seeing. And so my experience as a traveler has been going to these different places where you expect, okay, the cost of living in this place is going to be $2,500 a month. And then you get there and you're like, okay, no, that wasn't the case. The cost is now $4,500 a month because of globalization. But Robert, what are some other places that you've kind of seen globalization taking hold, where you've seen a balancing of prices around the world?
Yeah, so I would say, for me, globalization, it's increasing the interconnectedness through trade, communication, and migration, right? And so in this instance, you're seeing trade and migration, right? And communication taking a role, because communication, someone's communicating to the consumers who are all over the world that, hey, say Thailand is a great place to come and have a good time and spend less money, get more for your money, right? And so then you see that communication spread across the globe, globalization, and then more and more people start coming to Thailand, right? Then the people in Thailand, nothing's changing for them except for they're seeing an influx of people. And with an influx of people comes an influx of money. And the people that are owning the businesses or the services are going to see the top part of the money, and then it'll, of course, trickle down. And then it comes to human nature, which we're all greedy. Some are more greedy than others, right? There's a healthy form of greed that you need to get up at every day and hustle and go make money. But then there's an unhealthy form of greed that is not a growth mindset, right? For anybody involved. And so I would say that you see these business owners then get greedy because they see the money coming in. And then they say, oh, well, these guys will pay more for our service and product. And a lot of these people probably tell them that. They say, oh, this is such a great time, or this was such a great meal. I would have paid X dollars if I was somewhere else. Well, you're a businessman or woman. You start to think, well, wait a second. I've only been getting $5, but I could get $20 for this. That's amazing. Now I'm going to start charging 20 because I know the consumers will pay it. That doesn't mean I'll pay my people more. It just means I'll make more, right? So that's the kind of mindset. It's human nature. So whether you're an American or Indonesian or Chinese, wherever you're coming from in the world, you're a human. And at the core, we do have greed. And, that's a big part of globalization taking over. And it's blamed on globalization, but it's not globalization. Globalization assisted in it. but it comes down to supply and demand at the end of the day, which is just a common factor in business. And so I would say, for instance, Africa is it's an underdeveloped but a developing country or a continent, right? And then you have the countries within Africa, and some are growing faster than others. But Africa has been pillaged by global powers for decades and longer, and there's a reason for it. If they empower Africa, well, then guess what? The labor becomes more expensive. The goods become more expensive. The materials to create goods that we sell in the United States and China and India become more expensive. So who wants to help Africa become the best when if they become the best, then the rest of the world sacrifices, their cheap labor and their cheap material cost. So it's a crazy conundrum that, is just part of the global economy. But that's how I see what's taking place. Like, if you want to call it globalization, it is globalization because we're increasing trade, communication, and migration throughout the world. But at the end of the day, what happens with that increase of those three factors is business. And then business takes place, and then that switches over to human nature, like we just talked.
Right. Yeah. And I guess I don't want to get too deep into the political side of it, although I guess this is a fairly politically charged topic. But I will say that, like, as an environmentalist, I'm always excited when I see material costs rising, and which is crazy to most people. But when I see material costs rising, it means that we're going to burn through less material, that people are going to find ways to creatively recycle, reduce, reuse, which was a really popular slogan in the 90s. What was it? Reduce, reuse, recycle. But like that's really a part of my mindset, right? Like I now that I have a temporary home where I've switched to a semi-nomadic lifestyle, people are always shocked when they see my apartment because I intentionally don't have, like, I have a lot of stuff. I'm not going to lie. It's a lot of stuff, especially after living out of a suitcase for 6 years. But it's not so much stuff. Like there are things that people are like, well, why don't you own this? Well, why don't you own that? And I'm like, well, I can actually get away without having one, right? So like, I like to cook Chinese food. Why don't I have a wok? Well, I don't have a wok because A, like I intentionally took a small apartment for many reasons. But B, like I can also cook that same stir fry in a frying pan. I can cook that same stir fry in a pot. I can cook that same, and so like, okay, why do I really need to have a wok if I'm cooking if I have other utilities or ways to cook this thing? And so reduce, reuse, recycle, but other things like, I don't know, like there are, tools for everything. Like I saw like a ginger peeler, like a specific tool for peeling ginger. Well, you can peel ginger with the back of a spoon, and things like this. Like, I think it's really cool that someone invented a ginger peeler, but it's really not necessary. And so I'm not a huge fan of like just buying. I'm a huge fan of repair. Like I just took my, like, as a very good digital nomad, my backpack broke. So I took, instead of buying a new backpack, like for travel, I took it to a luggage repair, and he repaired it. It cost me $50 to repair it. It's now good as new. It's got another year of life left on it. And so when I see material costs rising, I get really excited because for me, for more wealthier economies, I then see people, like more businesses springing up in terms of repairing, and that there's less, over purchasing. That said, when you do look at globalization, if you look at some of these more emerging economies, I'm keenly aware that it starts to mean that they just can afford less. And so, like if a car gets 3 times as expensive, they're 3 times less likely to buy a car. So it inadvertently obviously affects poorer economies. But when we look at the rise of globalization and the increase in salaries in these economies, then they have more purchasing power. More purchasing power tends to lead to higher education. Higher education tends to lead to like better things. We're seeing like way more creative stuff coming out of economies that, like, for instance, I love going to Colombia now for design. Colombia has emerged as a really design centric country, whereas before they were on the map for like they're famous for Narcos, for instance. But now it's a great place to go if you really want a good graphic designer. It's also a great place to go to for a social media manager. So like we're seeing like really cool trends happening because of all of this.
Yeah, and so you just mentioned the fact that like you've gone to Colombia to get a graphic designer in term like virtually or digitally, right? And so that graphic designer in Colombia before the internet, so like in the 90s, that was your milestone started to take place for globalization. So you had the internet revolution, you had NAFTA, you started to outsource things to overseas, and that was huge, right? So the internet allowed people to connect overseas, like in long distances. And then you start to outsource. You're saying, oh, well, I need a video editor, but here in the United States, the cost of living is higher, so the video editor charges more money. Whereas in Colombia or Thailand or Eastern Europe, they don't have that higher cost of living. So I can go pay a video editor $10, which would have cost me $100 in the United States, right? That video editor said, hey, I only could charge $2 or $3 for my service because I'm not connected globally. I don't have any customers outside of my small town or my small region. So then the internet comes in and then allows them to connect to people overseas. And then they're like, well, I'll do it for $5 because it doesn't cost me that much for milk and eggs, right? But then first in the United States, I could never do it for that cheap because I have the cost of living, right? And so you see that regardless, the wealthy person was able to say, okay, well, I'm not going to support the person in the United States, too expensive for me. I'll go support someone in another country. They'll make themselves feel better about the fact that they're paying them a wage that's higher than they would normally make in that country. But in the end of the day, it's still not a good enough wage, right? But because of the cost of living not being so high in that country, the Colombian feels good about his $10 editing video, right? And so it is I don't know if I would call it a fair trade, but it has allowed these these cities, regions, and countries to grow exponentially when they would have never been able to grow in the past because of the lack of communication and interconnectedness through the internet and other forms. And so I would say that right now, the people that benefit from that, need to find the happy medium to where we can help them grow, because what's happening is the governments in those countries they start to see that the people in their country are making more money, right? Well, how does the government run? It runs off people making money, right? And so it's a sad ecosystem because you want to empower these people, but then they wind up just like we do in the United States. You just said that Thailand, the cost of food went from $5 to $25. Well, we can afford it, but the people that live there that can't afford it, right?
Right. Well, and I do think we also need to look locally. So we're talking about globalization on an international scale, but if you look in the U.S., like I think most people outside the U.S. don't realize that we still have places inside of the USA where you can buy a 2-bedroom house for $20,000. $20,000 buys you a 2-bedroom house in certain parts of the USA, right? And like everybody looks at the US as a wealthy country, and okay, you guys are, you're all living in these $1 million mansions or whatever, but actually there are equally poor parts of the US. And so globalization isn't just an international thing, it's also a national thing. And I actually, when I started looking for team members, I was like, okay, I'm going to look inside the US, outside of New York City, right? So like, why should I hire a customer service representative sitting in their apartment in New York City? New York City is chock full of amazing creatives. It's chock full of people who work in finance, who are amazing. But if you want someone who is like, I'm working from home doing customer service, maybe it's not the best place to find that staff member. Maybe you can support a stay-at-home mom in Idaho, or I don't know, like pick your place. And so I think it's really interesting locally, but we're also seeing now what I think is fascinating, what I think is really amazing, and what I'm really excited about is that as you have these international markets, seeing an increase in earnings, they're also, like I said, increasing their education. So because they can now afford to save up and go to school, they're going to universities. The universities are getting better. They're going to international universities and bringing that education back to their home country. And now we're seeing new economies or new competition, new hotspots for industry specialization. So you have I think of the automotive industry, and I'm really sorry for Germany. Germany for at least the last 30 years was living off of being the top manufacturer for automotives, right? And so now suddenly you have competition with China. You have competition. Okay, there was always competition with Japan, but I don't think anyone expected that China is becoming an emerging hotspot for automotive. But they're doing it.
In Dubai, a lot of the Chinese car manufacturers are selling their vehicles there. So you get to see them in real life. And the quality, that it's superior to anything that's being delivered by Mercedes or BMW. And it's much cheaper, right? So you could spend $40,000 on an SUV that would cost you $100,000 through Mercedes. And this $40,000 SUV has more features than the $100,000 SUV. And it's because it's China, right? So huge competition in China. You never would have thought that, for vehicles at least.
Yeah, at least not I mean we saw China as the place to go for cheap plastic, for handbags, for jeans, but now they're becoming, and I forget what it's called, but I read in the news last week, I think last week, I read in the news recently that now Dubai is starting, because Dubai is always wanting to be at the forefront, and they're really, like, I give them credit for their creativity. They're now bringing these markets to that, right? So rather than having to fly to China or fly to Tokyo or fly, India, they're bringing reps from all of these companies to a local market, so you can go sit down, meet with these companies without ever having to leave Dubai. Which again goes back to like why Dubai is such a creative hotspot. And if you're looking for a place to make your home base, and the Middle East is a consideration for you, honestly, it's a really good spot. There's a lot of cool stuff coming out of Dubai.
So I want to give like an example, like a personal example of how empowering Dubai is. All right. So you hear it. A lot of people will tell you, go to Dubai, become a millionaire. If you have the drive and determination and the skill sets required, you can literally go fast track your wealth building if you in a place like Dubai. So for me, I have a company in Dubai. I'm a resident of Dubai, or the UAE, and I've been doing business since 2018 in Dubai. But I don't spend, I go 4 times a year. So that's not a lot of time to spend in a country. It is for most people, but for me, I could use a whole lot more time. If you count, like, I go 4 times a year, and sometimes it's for a few weeks, sometimes it's for 10 days. So let's just say on the last year, I've spent about 60 days in Dubai, maybe, right? Maybe less than that. Okay. But in the last year, I can show growth metrics that I could never achieve in the United States. And so just imagine just showing up 10 to 20 days at a time, 4 times a year, have stronger growth metrics than where I'm most of my time in the US market, right?
Yeah. And so, like, I guess to back that up, JLL's Global Real Estate Transparency Index came out with a report that said in 2022, cross-border real estate investments, that means people investing in another country than where they live or where they're residents, reached $730 billion. Billion dollars. So, like, it's not just, an immigrant or an expat purchasing real estate in their home country and living in another country. Like, you don't reach that number by a few hedge cases. Like, these are people really investing in different markets. And I see it where I am currently. I see people coming and investing their money because they believe in this economy. And again, this is just leading to furtherization of globalization. And so when you look at the different trends, Dubai is an amazing one to focus on. But I think there's also other stuff. Like, I was working today on an ad campaign for another business, and I realized, like, you're now looking at competition in markets that you never thought you were going to compete in. You're looking at AI is amazing. It's furthering this. But also you're seeing, like, now various countries are creating software that are doing this. That software is not being created in the US. The software is being created in Asia. The software is being created in India. The software is being created in Europe. And again, you've got this, like, everyone's starting to compete at an international level, and it's really interesting. And so, Robert, like, when you see the rise of remote friendly businesses, what do you think of?
Globalization would be the first thing I think of, because it wouldn't be possible without that interconnectedness. We're having a podcast, we're talking about business, and we're trying to develop more business together. And we're doing that from 2 different spaces in the world, right? So, that wouldn't be possible without globalization. It wouldn't be possible for the guy in Thailand to sell his web development services to the person in the United States for cheaper than I'd pay in the United States, but more expensive than he'd get in Thailand. And so, like, when I think of, the remote working and the ability to do so, yeah, it's thanks to the internet and globalization and getting that internet out to as many people as possible. And then technology that's allowed people in villages to get Wi-Fi, like Starlink. And so I think that remote work is a great example of the benefits of globalization because it's empowered people to do so much with less, just like starting a company. It's easy to start a company. You can start a company in one day. If you put a website up in one day, you can generate sales the next day. When in history have we been able to accomplish that?
Yeah. I know there was a report by McKinsey that said by the or that said that currently at the time of the report, they estimate that 25% of the workforce can work remotely 3 to 5 days a week without impacting productivity. Within my own company, I mean, I exclusively hire location independent workers. So my team is spread across the globe. We like when I tell people their working hours, it's always like set one standard for working hours and say like you need to work, this time. But I don't care where in the world you are. Like so if you're working from Buenos Aires, if you're working from Bali, if you're working from wherever, I don't care. But we're also I was talking to someone yesterday and they started highlighting industries that I didn't even think about. And so like for instance, there's a radiologist who's now working remotely. So people send him the radiology reports or the images, and he's analyzing the image on his computer from Thailand, and he's writing the report and sending it back. And so he's doing this. He doesn't have to sit with the patient anymore. And same for me when I travel because I want some consistency at least in my health. So my doctor is in India. I found this amazing doctor, wonderful woman. I am going to continue using her as long as she's working. And anywhere I go in the world, she's requesting like things that I have to get done locally, like labs. So you can't blood test virtually just yet, but I'll go to any lab wherever I am in the world, take that report. Usually they offer it in English and the local language. Either way, I'll have it translated and I send it back to her. We do a video call and she writes me a prescription. That prescription, most pharmacies in the world leave out places like the US and Canada, but most pharmacies in the world will fill that prescription for me. And so this is just like, how things are changing because people are finally opening their minds to the idea that that people really can be location independent. And we're just seeing a huge increase in this. However, we are what I can't explain, and maybe Robert, you have some theories on this, is that the IMF reports that income equality in the year 2025 has increased 11% since the 1990s. And so, but that's within countries. So like I said, in the US, you still have people earning 250,000 and you still have people earning 35,000, which is, but yeah, 20,000, which is actually, is that possible with the minimum? What is the minimum wage in the US?
I'm not sure.
I have to look that up. Okay, $7.25. The minimum wage is $7.25 an hour. Yeah, so that puts the minimum wage at just over 15,000 a year in the U.S., which is which comes out to roughly $1,200 a month, which is bonkers. Which is absolutely bonkers. So
I forget when the gas prices went up exponentially, but they went up exponentially. All right. And then people say, oh, they'll go back down. We'll get it back down. We'll get it back down. Well, gas prices never really went down. They fluctuate a little bit, but now we pay $4 or $5 a gallon. It used to be like $1.50 a gallon. Right. So what happens is like inflation takes place. The corporations benefit from inflation because in majority of the time, their cost didn't go up as much as they inflated the price. Then they see the consumer pay that price. Why would they ever reduce their price? And that is what you've seen happen over decades. So that's why the income equality has only grown. It's because of the people who are making these decisions in these corporations are greedy and they don't understand how to take care of the people that help build the corporation. So I have an auto repair business. My mechanics make $50 an hour. That's how much I pay, $50 an hour. I only charge $125 an hour. Okay. So I'm making $75 an hour as the company and I've got expenses. They don't. Right. I take care of their gas. Give them an allowance for their car. People say, well, why do you pay so much money? Well, because they deserve it. Without them, I wouldn't have a business. They fix cars. People don't give mechanics. I call them technicians, not mechanics. People don't give technicians enough credit for what they do. And that can be applied to so many different industries. I can get away a lot of my business I could do virtually and I could hire people remotely, but I don't want to. And if I do, I pay them what I pay in the United States because I don't let greed take effect. We all have greed. Like I said, there's a healthy form of greed, but I don't let the unhealthy form of greed take place in my life and my businesses. And so I pay everybody more money than they should be paid, than the industry says they should be paid. And I make more money. It's very possible. Like I would sit down with my friends who own auto shops. They're doing millions of dollars a year in revenue, but they're only seeing $700,000-800,000 a year in profit. I'm doing less revenue and seeing more profit, and I'm paying people more money and I'm charging less. Like we charge 30 to 50% less on auto repair than the rest of the people, and we come to you. So in America's convenience costs more. I could charge you more money for coming to you, and I charge you less. Why? Because I care about people. Your vehicle is your lifeline. If you don't have it, or a form of transportation, even if you take the bus, you can't go make money. Now, I know we're talking about remote workers and how they make money remotely without transportation and so forth, and that's great. But unfortunately, a lot of people don't have the ability, the creative mindset to live a life like that and provide a value in that manner that people will pay for. So, but they should be paid more money because it's because of them we can operate in the society the way we do. And so it bothers me a great deal to see the income inequality that's taking place around the world because it's not required. Everybody could do well and make money, but it's about the greed that business owners and the corporations and the stakeholders have, and they don't want that money to trickle down. So that's where the disconnect is. So that doesn't mean that someone can't become successful. It just means it's not as easy. But technology and globalization has made it much easier than it's ever been in the entire history of human beings. So I would say there is no excuse unless you don't have your full mental or physical capacity. If you have your mental and physical capacity, success can be inevitable if you apply the right mindset and you execute. But a lot of people don't know how to do that. And so that's why you see people working in lesser jobs being paid less money, and they're great people and they're smart and they could make more money. But we haven't provided them that ability, right? It's in society as a whole around the globe.
I guess what I start to see is what's really interesting in these various economies is the jobs that can be done remotely I'm seeing the pay on them going down because people are able to outsource that work. And the jobs that require someone to be in person are increasing like exponentially. So it's always been known that plumbers, electricians, anyone who's like working with their hands usually makes a pretty good amount of money if they're doing it well, or even remotely well. But now what I'm seeing is like just a huge increase. Like, I can't tell you how many times I've met plumbers, electricians who make 3 times what I make, 4 times what I make, and it's because they're doing a job that cannot be outsourced to a lower economy. They're doing a job that cannot be fixed with AI or replaced with AI. And so I wonder if we're going to start to see an increase in popularity for trade work. And I think that's really amazing because I can't tell you how many people I've met who take an office job because they think it pays more, but actually they'd rather be working with their hands. And I'm never going to say it's a lesser job, like being an electrician, being a plumber, being whatever. Like my best friend he studied welding, and he's one of the smartest people I know, but he could not be bothered just sit in an office all day. It was the death of him. And so he studied welding, and he like shot up the ladder like immediately. Within 5 years, he was like top manager. And now he's like a lead, and like now he's like one of the most sought after people in his industry. But it's because he really wanted to work with his hands, and he said, I'm going to do it. Like I have no shame, and he did it. And I think that's amazing. And I wonder if that's what we're going to see is just what's the word that is again respect for some of these like I can't think of the word for the more trade work. I'm not going to say blue collar because I think that's a fairly derogatory term. But people working with their hands instead of sitting at a desk. And frankly, like it's I don't know about you, but there's a lot of scientific evidence about how bad sitting at your desk is for you. So I'm a little bit envious of these people. And maybe this is why I like the Airbnb business so much, because it actually requires me to leave my desk on a regular basis. Like I was at a photo shoot last week. Yesterday, I was running and looking at properties tomorrow I have a meeting looking at another property. And so, it requires me, it's kind of more of a hybrid. And so I'm curious to see what's going to come out of this. But I do know that for those who want a location independent lifestyle, this is something that you should continue to leverage as long as it's a possibility. But be ready for the idea that these economies are increasing in cost. Right now, you can save a lot of money by living and working remotely. You may not see that forever. Just consider that in your preparation for the location independence lifestyle. But now, this year, take advantage of it. 10 years from now, I can't tell you what it's going to look like, but I can say that if you find interesting real estate, in my opinion, if you find interesting real estate in a desired location like Thailand, like Indonesia, buy that real estate, because my money says that in the next decade, you're going to see those emerging markets growing exponentially compared to places like Europe, places like the US.
Yes. And that's because there's places like Europe and the US, they're oversaturated. There's not many places to build. If not most places, you have to knock things down. And that requires a lot more than just building from vacant land. And so all these different emerging countries that have all this land are going to grow exponentially because they can't grow anywhere else. Like, people can't grow there, so they're going to come grow there. In Indonesia, the Russians are huge in Indonesia right now, in Thailand. They're investing in hotels and resorts and housing. I mean, literally, the Russians, they came to Dubai during, when the Ukraine war started, and now they're all going to Thailand. The ruble is not doing well. And so they're selling a lot of the properties that they bought at a discount because they don't care. They're just getting their money out and they're going to another place. They're not going back to Russia. They're just going to another place. It's nomadic, right? They left Russia, went to Dubai. Now they're going to Thailand. So yes, Thailand is a great area, an emerging market, many emerging markets. And I've seen many of them because I've traveled, like growing up, going trips with my, wife at the time. And we would go to like the Virgin Islands or certain parts of Mexico, and you can see it coming, right? I saw it coming 10 years ago, and now you can go back there and actually see the growth that's taking place. So don't be the person that saw it coming and then go visit again 10 years later and be like, oh, I knew this was going to happen. No, it's common sense. It's a mathematical equation.
Sometimes you have the money and sometimes you don't. I will say, I can't tell you. I remember like really, really crying internally over, I saw Austin happening. I saw it. There was a year I came back. I was so excited. I told everybody I could tell, Austin is where you need to put your money. Austin is where you need to put your money. And of course he said, why are you not putting your money there? And I said, it's a bad year for me. My business had just started to take off. I knew all the signs of a good market, but I didn't have the money to invest. And within the next year, it was saturated. But those who did invest came back to me and said, wow, that was the best tip you've ever come up with.
We'll leave it like this. You just said it. Sometimes you just don't have the money at the right time. That doesn't mean you can't invest in that growth, right? So like I went to the Virgin Islands back like when I was 22, whatever. I don't even know how old I was. Well, I was younger. And I saw that like I had an automotive business. I had just started the automotive business like 2 years prior. So I didn't have enough money to go buy a house in the Virgin Islands, nor would I do that at the time. But I was driving in the taxi, and the roads in the Virgin Islands it's very mountainous, and so you're going through these hills and your bumps, and like the shocks don't last long. And I knew that being an auto repair. So I look at the driver. I was like, hey, how often do you change your shocks out? He's like, oh, every 2 or 3 months. I was like, oh, cool. Where do you buy the shocks? Like, oh, we have to buy, there's only one Advanced Auto Parts. It's on the island, a part of the, St. Thomas. And, everything's so expensive because it gets shipped there. And then once it's shipped there, that cost gets passed along to us, and plus their markup. So I was like, okay, well, let me go back to the United States. I own an auto repair shop. I get wholesale parts. Let me see how much I can get you these control arms for, and I'll just start sending them to you. Next thing you know, I'm sending control arms to the Virgin Islands, to the taxi drivers, and then the one taxi driver is telling all his other taxi driver friends to buy the shocks from me. Now I'm selling shocks. So
that's an amazing story.
That's what I'm saying. I want to show people that you can invest into an emerging market without having to buy real estate. Literally, you could have a product that costs $5 and you could sell it for $10 there, and all you have to do is just go meet the right people who could buy that product. So don't sleep on that opportunity. So if you see an emerging market, find a way to get in on it, regardless if it's through real estate or selling a $5 or $10 product.
Yeah, it's true. And I think that's the one thing. I mean, now I don't know. Actually, I am going to say this is part of globalization. It's something that I like. Sometimes you go to a country and you discover a product that doesn't exist yet in other countries, and you think, why has this not made it over to XYZ other market or outside of the borders of this place? I think they in Thailand they have these herbal inhalers that I absolutely love. If you're sick, I had COVID 2 months ago. And if you're sick, if you have trouble breathing, you literally just open the herbal inhaler, smell it. I like to put it next to my bed when I go to sleep, and it opens up your lungs. It does what essentially like really strong cough medicine would do. And all it is something you inhale. And it's using a very, very traditional medicine, very traditional herbs. And I thought to myself, like, this is great. They literally packaged it in these little inhalers that they sell at the supermarket at the and you can just buy it for like $1 or $2. Why is that not being sold in other countries? Why is it not being sold around the world? And so again, that's a great example. If you find something that you think is amazing, buy a handful of them, see if you can sell it. And if you can sell it, establish a relationship with a local vendor and start importing that random product if you can, if it's allowed.
Teach them how to ship and drop ship it, right? Have them teach them a new trick. Say, hey guys, I'll tell you what, I'm going to make orders. I'm going to show you what to do. You're going to take it here, you're going to pack it here, you're going to send it to me. And then you could do this for other clients. So everything is possible in this globalization driven marketplace.
Yeah, definitely. And you don't even need, I said import it, but actually you don't really need to become an importer in most places as long as you're selling directly to the end consumer. So like you said, drop ship it. Anyway, this is amazing. I love having these conversations. I love thinking like, of course, I never thought I'll think outside the box, like selling products in other economies. It's amazing. Thank you as always for all of your time, for all of your energy, for all of your ideas, Robert. Anything else that you'd like to add before we end?
I mean, everything is possible, especially in this day and age, with access to technology, information, the spread of information, accessing other people's mindsets, right? It's never been so easy. So remember all of that as you grow your business, whether it be remote friendly or, working for someone, and if you're working for someone, figure out all the tricks and then go do it on your own. That's all I could say. I hate to see people like get into the corporate ladder, and it works for some people and you can go high and make lots of money, but like you're always going to be paid less than you could have been paid if you took that same idea and the same drive, determination, and execution that was required to make that person millions or billions of dollars could do that for yourself, especially with all of the access to the benefits that globalization has created for our global economy.
Amazing. Thank you, Robert.
Thank you, Michelle.
Have a good one. Bye-bye.